European continent produced some of the greatest empires in the world. The Greek and Romans were from this continent, and then the Portuguese and Spanish who established global empires in 16th and 17th century. They were also from the European continent. So were Dutch, Germans, Italians, the British, and the French. They were all from the European continent. But because of two global wars, Europe somehow lost its power, especially after the Second World War. The two global powers of the time, France and the UK, they were considerably weakened because of these war, and they were left at the mercy of the United States. And some European powers, especially the UK, decided to side with the United States and enter into different agreements so that it could somehow maintain its prestige. But by and large, after the Second World War, Western Europe especially sided with the United States, entering into military alliances as well. And at times it proved very loyal to the United States. But unfortunately, it seems that the US, according to critics under Trump, does not want to give any importance to Europe and its interest. It was first, it was the tariff that was imposed to weaken European economy. Later on, the United States accused Europe of taking advantage, but there are critics who believe that in reality, it was the United States that greatly benefited because of the decline of political and military power of the UK and France. And the European economy that was heavily dependent on coal was converted into oil by the United States in one way or another way, directly or indirectly, making Europe dependent on the supply of oil, and at the same time the United States somehow secured hegemony over the Middle Eastern oil, forcing Saudi Arabia and other Gulf monarchies and oil producing countries to trade in dollars, which strengthened the position of the United States. The United States was also more or less neutral during First World War and the Second World War as well. It jumped into both wars, but it was not as active in the war as other powers were from the beginning. So during the First World War, it kept on supplying weapons to all belligerent states, and after the devastation of economy, it also flooded European market with consumer goods. And during the Second World War, it did the same thing. And according to some estimates, between 1945 and 1960, or even during the decade of 60s, the US would contribute more than 30% to global GDP, because 18 European economy had been shrunk by 18% during the Second World War. So the United States stepped in, filling the vacuum that was created there. And then United States, of course, uh, in a way forced, not exactly forced, but it encouraged European countries to enter into military alliance. And Europe, according to many critics, picked a fight with the Soviet Union, which was a mighty empire, just for the sake of American interests. But some Europeans say that the United States should have taken these all factors into account uh, before hurling allegations against European leaderships. In reality, the European Union or the countries, Western allies of the United States, invoked Article 5 of NATO for the first time in the aftermath of 9/11, when American interest and security had been jeopardized, and America needed allies in Iraq and Afghanistan, especially in Afghanistan, and many NATO countries, they sided with the United States, although it was not Europe that was hit by 9/11. In reality, it was the United States that was targeted. 9/11, Europe picked fight with Islamic fundamentalists, and because of that siding of Europe with the United States, especially after the Afghanistan war, it also had to face terrorist attacks over the years in different parts of Europe. So, and some historian believe that the United States also used Marshall Plan to interfere with the internal affairs of Europe, asking governments in Italy and France not to include Communist Party into coalition governments. So now the United States, it seems, does not want to give any importance to Western interest, especially the interest of the European continent. Some critics say that President Donald Trump knew very well that if he triggered any conflict in the Middle East, especially if any aggression is carried out against Iran, then the Islamic Republic would resort to the shutting down of Strait of Hormuz. Despite all that, the United States did go ahead with the plan to invade Iran, and Iran consequently shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The United States secured its own interest by securing oil in Venezuela. It already has massive deposit or massive reserves of oil, so it is not dependent on Middle Eastern oil any longer, especially the discovery after the discovery of shale gas during the time of Obama. The United States doesn't need Strait of Hormuz or Middle Eastern oil the way it used to in the past. Now it's countries like South Korea, Japan, and Western countries, European countries that are heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And now Strait of Hormuz has been shut, and even then adding to the problems and financial woes of the ordinary European people. It is not only Middle Eastern war in Ukraine also mainly affected European continents. They were the ones who had to accommodate or welcome uh, hundreds and thousands of Ukrainian as a refugees. They were the ones who were deprived of cheap sources of energy. Donald Trump, according to critics, forced European leaders not to buy gas from Russia. That increased the cost of living across the European continent. But on the other hand, American administration did not provide any alternative cheap sources of energy. Instead, American companies started selling their own expensive sources of energy, forcing European continent to pump billions of dollars into that. So basically, Ukraine conflict, Russia is number one enemy of the United States, like China, but it's Western continent, it's the European continent that is suffering a lot because of that. So now the question is that what options does the European Union or European countries have if the United States is trying to protect just its own interest, despite the fact that at at the pressure of Trump administration, the European countries increased their defense budget, which, according to critics, largely benefited American arms manufacturing companies. And of course, if there is a conflict, it's also going to benefit American oil companies. In return, what did they get? They got expensive or costly energy resources. They had to buy American arms, and they had to face the flux of Ukrainian immigrants. In addition to that, they also had to buy expensive agriculture goods, which they could have got before the Ukrainian conflict. So, what option do they have? If United States is not ready to take into account the interest of the European continent, uh, then does it mean that European countries should revisit their policy? Europe has learned a lot from its history. There was a time when uh, England and France were fighting. They indulged themselves in a terrible war lasting for 100 years. Um Germany conquered France within 6 weeks during the First World War. European countries fought the religious war, 30 years war, claiming more than uh, 3 million people. Some estimates go to the extent of suggesting that 3 to 8 million people were decimated during those religious wars. So Europe learned a lot. They forgot their bitter memories of the past, and they normalized their ties with their neighbors. So now the question is that with hardly a few hundred nuclear weapons. Europe is not in a position to compete militarily with Russia. Russia has strategic depth. It has one of the largest, or rather, the largest nukes in the world. So, is it possible for Europe to forget about the bitter memories of the past and normalize relations with Russia, or possibly outreach China? Because Europe is interested in promoting, environmentally sustainable energy, and China is also leader in uh, solar panels and wind energy and others. So this is where their interests converge, and maybe they could engage Iran in discussion, in talks, normalize situation in the Middle East, because the United States, especially Trump administration, badly dented the reputation of European leaders by unilaterally scrapping nuclear deal that European leaders and the United States and China and Russia had secured with Iran during the time of Obama. So Trump unilaterally cancelled it, unilaterally scrapped it. It also dented the reputation of European leaders because Iran is no longer ready to trust them. And in the same way, it did not go down well with the developing countries because they do not see Europe as a global leaders now. So some critics believe that if Europe can forget, I mean, if Germany can normalize ties with France, despite the fact that the two countries used to be sworn enemy, if France and UK can forget their 100 years war, if different European countries can forget their religious war and forge unity, then why not reach out Russia, which is neighboring states, and normalize ties with them? So some critics believe that if Europe normalizes ties with Russia, reaching out China, so it might act as a deterrent against the unbridled power of the United States and Israel.